cruelty disguised in mercy, and an innocent girl thrown into a never-ending nightmare. She thought losing her mother was the harshest blow fate could ever deal her. But destiny had far darker plans in store. A stepmother, with a fake smile, a heart devoid of mercy, and a devilish scheme lurking deep in a wild, unforgiving forest. But can evil truly prevail? Can injustice remain hidden forever? Watch how silence turns into a cry for justice, how a fragile girl flips the balance of power. This is no ordinary story. It's a battle between the purity of childhood and the cruelty of heartless souls, ending in a way no one will ever forget. In a small village where simplicity blended with kindness, lived a good man with the woman he loved dearly. Their life was filled with peace and gratitude, and soon they were blessed with a daughter, so beautiful she felt like a spark of hope lighting up their world. Day by day, the little girl grew under the wings of her parents, wrapped in love, untouched by sorrow. But just as life brings joy, it also delivers pain. The mother fell ill, struck by a cruel disease that gave her no time. And then, she was gone. She left behind her 10-year-old daughter and a devastated husband, lost in a world he no longer knew how to face. The father did his best, pouring all his effort into filling the gaping void in his daughter's life. But deep down, he knew a mother's tenderness could never be replaced. As time passed, the burden grew heavier. He realized he might need someone to help raise his daughter, to care for the home. Yet he hesitated. What if the presence of a new woman harmed his little girl? What if it broke her heart even more? Then came the surprise. It was the daughter herself who suggested he remarry. She saw his exhaustion. He was carrying it all alone. She pleaded gently, "Marry again, Father. I'm okay. But you need someone to take care of you." Moved by her insistence and deep concern for him, the father finally agreed, after much hesitation, and chose a woman he believed would be a support for him and his daughter. The little girl had no idea that the days ahead would not bring her the happiness she had once known, but would instead lead her down a path she could never have imagined. She thought losing her mother was the greatest pain she would ever face, but the truth was far crueler. For absence is not always the deepest wound. Sometimes someone comes to fill the void, only to turn it into a scar that never heals. Days passed after the mother's death, and grief quietly grew in the girl's heart. Yet she tried her best to stay strong. Her father did everything he could to make up for her loss, but the burden of responsibility weighed heavily on him. It was not easy. His little girl needed a gentle hand to care for her, a soft voice to comfort her when the night brought fear, a heart that could embrace her like her mother once had. At first, the father was reluctant to remarry, but before the persistent pleas of his daughter, despite the pain in her voice, he gave in. He finally married the woman he had chosen, not knowing that this step would turn his daughter's life upside down. He didn't realize that the woman he believed would be a mother to his child had entered their lives with entirely different intentions. The new woman entered their home, and at first, everything seemed perfect. She smiled warmly at the girl, showered her with affection, bought her sweets, and made every effort to make her feel safe. The girl began to feel a glimmer of comfort, believing, if only briefly, that maybe this woman was the blessing sent by God to ease the absence of her mother. But little by little, the mask began to fall. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things, a strange look here, a double-meaning word there, subtle gestures the young girl didn't yet understand. But as time passed, she began to sense something was off. The smiles no longer felt real, and the warmth she once hoped for began to feel like a carefully played act. The real change came when the stepmother gave birth to her own daughter. From that moment on, everything shifted. The loving gaze that once reached the girl turned cold. The kindness disappeared, replaced with indifference and even cruelty. She no longer felt like she belonged in that home, as if her very presence had become a burden. At first, the stepmother's favoritism was subtle, giving her daughter the first helping of food, buying her the prettier clothes, inviting her to sit beside her while subtly pushing the other girl away. But over time, the favoritism turned into neglect, and neglect became mistreatment. The girl soon found herself treated like a servant in her own home. The stepmother assigned her chores far beyond her years and demanded her obedience without question. No explanation, no kindness. And the father? He remained unaware. He believed his wife treated his daughter with the same affection she showed when he was around. He didn't know that the moments he spent away from home were, for his daughter, a waking nightmare. And during those long, dark days, the girl began to understand something she had never realized before. Not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, and sometimes tragedy comes disguised as family. Life was no longer what it used to be. Each passing day made the stepmother's cruelty more unbearable, and the little girl had no choice but to remain silent. She knew no one would believe her. Her stepmother was a master of appearances, showering her with fake love when the father was home and turning against her the moment he left. The chores became too heavy for her small body, scrubbing the floors, washing the dishes, even caring for the pampered little daughter of the stepmother, who did nothing but command and complain. But it didn't stop there. There were moments of cruelty so subtle they could not be seen, but they carved deep into her soul. One night, after a long day of labor, the girl sat quietly in the corner of her tiny room, her body aching, her throat tight with unspoken sobs. She wanted to cry, but even tears had become a luxury she could no longer afford. Just then, she heard footsteps outside. Her father was home. She jumped up, quickly wiped her eyes, and ran toward the door. But before she could reach him, the stepmother grabbed her arm tightly and whispered coldly, "Say nothing. Do you understand?" The girl nodded in fear and returned to her room without uttering a word. And the father? He had no idea that the daughter who had just rushed to greet him had hidden a pain too deep for him to see. He didn't know that this night would mark the beginning of something darker, a crueler plan being spun in secret. Days passed. Nothing changed. In fact, things grew worse. The stepmother found new ways to torment the girl, as if her heart had never known mercy. No mistake, no matter how small, was forgiven. It became a crime beyond redemption. And the father? He was buried in work. He'd come home exhausted, only to find his wife in tears, complaining about the girl's disobedience. She made up stories, twisted the truth, played her role perfectly, until, little by little, doubt crept into his heart. And just like that, without knowing how or why, the gap between father and daughter began to widen. The girl knew her stepmother was lying, but she didn't have the strength to defend herself. She feared her father's anger, feared he might accuse her of being disobedient. So, she chose silence, though her small heart was screaming in pain. But silence wasn't enough to protect her. The stepmother had already made up her mind. She could no longer bear the girl's presence in her life. She couldn't stand the way her husband still looked at the girl, with love, despite all her efforts to erase it. One night, the stepmother sat in her room, plotting a way to rid herself of the girl once and for all. She thought long and hard, until a wicked smile crept onto her face. She had found the perfect solution. She wouldn't kill her with her own hands. That would be too risky. Instead, she would let nature do the job. She would take the girl to a place from which there was no return. She would abandon her deep in the forest, alone, helpless, and left to the mercy of the wild. The next morning, she called the girl with a calm voice the girl wasn't used to hearing, which instantly made her uneasy. The stepmother's eyes looked different that day. Not angry, not hateful, but strangely calm. In a gentle tone, she said, "Come, sweetheart. Let's go gather some firewood from the forest. We've run out, and I need your help." The girl didn't feel safe, but how could she refuse? She had been raised to obey, to endure what she could not handle. So she followed her, not knowing that she was walking straight into a fate she might never return from. The sunlight filtered through the tree branches, casting dancing shadows on the ground as the girl trailed behind her stepmother with hesitant steps. Nothing about that morning felt familiar, not even the air. It seemed to whisper secrets, dark ones. The girl kept walking, trying to convince herself that maybe this time was different. Maybe her stepmother had changed, but her heart was telling her another story. It whispered of danger, and it was drawing near. Then, deep in the forest, where no road could be seen and no sounds but the forest's breath remained, the stepmother stopped. She turned slowly, wearing a cold, triumphant smile. Then, with a chilling voice, she said, "Your part in this story ends here. You've been nothing but a burden, and now it's time to get rid of you." Before the girl could even process the words, she felt rough hands grab her arms. Her wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope. She tried to scream, to cry for help, but no one could hear her in that lonely, cruel place. She looked up at her, eyes wide with terror, hoping for mercy. But there was none. Only satisfaction in her stepmother's eyes, as if she had finally won. She left her there, tied and helpless, beneath the towering trees, surrounded by the deafening silence of the woods, broken only by the distant howls of wild animals. The woman stood for a moment, watching her like a hunter admiring its prey. Then she turned and walked away, never once looking back, never once remembering that God's eyes never sleep, and that cruelty, no matter how hidden, never lasts. The sun began to set, painting the sky with warm shades of orange. The girl sat on the ground, ropes digging into her skin, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She didn't know what awaited her, only that her heart trembled with fear. But at that very moment, a kind man, a woodcutter, was making his way through the forest, gathering firewood before nightfall. As he wandered between the trees, he heard something, a faint, trembling sound. He stopped in his tracks and listened closely. He followed the sound, kept following it, until he found the girl tied between the branches. Her thin body trembled, her eyes filled with tears and fear. He rushed to her side and gently untied her ropes, asking with deep concern, "What happened to you, my child? Who did this to you?" She looked at him, her eyes still wet, her heart still pounding with fear. Then, with a shaking voice, she told him everything. She begged him to take her far away from the village, and not to tell anyone where she was, so she wouldn't be forced back into the hell she had escaped. He looked at her with warmth and said softly, "Don't be afraid. You're safe now. I'll take you to my home and care for you like my own daughter." And so, he took her away, far from that village. Meanwhile, the stepmother returned to her house, certain that the girl would never come back. She believed her plan had succeeded completely, but what she didn't know was that fate was quietly weaving a harsher punishment for her. Back in the village, the father searched for his daughter for days. He asked everyone, checked every path, but no one had seen her. His wife told him the girl had gone into the forest and never returned. He assumed she had been attacked by wild beasts, and finally declared her dead. That loss shattered him. He sank into deep grief, unable to do anything but surrender to fate. Days passed. A heavy sadness hung over the village. until the day everything changed. The stepmother's daughter was playing near the well, as she always did. But that day, fate was not on her side. Her foot slipped, and she fell into the deep well. She screamed with all her strength, but no one was there to hear her. She tried to cling to the slick stone walls, but there was nothing to stop her fall. After a few moments of crying out, silence, and no voice was heard from her again. When the news reached the stepmother, she collapsed in shock. She couldn't believe it. Her daughter, gone like that. She screamed, cried uncontrollably, unable to bear the weight of her loss. But that was only the beginning of her punishment. A few days later, while the father was sitting in the village square, a stranger approached him, holding the hand of a girl who looked oddly familiar, a girl everyone thought was long dead. There she stood, tears in her eyes, looking at her father. He ran to her in disbelief, pulling her into a tight embrace, crying with joy. "How did you return, my daughter? Who saved you?" She turned to the kind man beside her, and in a soft voice said, "It was this kind woodcutter. He saved my life." The father thanked him from the depths of his heart, then turned to his daughter, asking for the full story. And there, she told him everything, every detail of the cruelty, every moment of the pain, the plan to end her life. At that moment, a storm of anger flared in the father's eyes. He turned to his wife, who was now shaking in fear, and confronted her with the truth. She couldn't deny a thing. The truth was exposed, and her mask fell. She collapsed to her knees, begging for mercy. But it was too late. The father cast her out of the house and declared her truth before the entire village. She became an outcast. No one spoke to her. No one helped her. She lived alone, drowning in sorrow and regret, until madness took her mind. As for the girl, she lived a life of peace with her father, and under the care of the kind woodcutter, who became a second father to her. She grew strong and wiser than ever before, and so justice triumphed in the end, and fate proved once again that cruelty never lasts, and the eyes of God never sleep.